And I said, well, I think, we're going to need something from the racing gods, to turn this around. And then Nicholas Latifi turned up. So I didn't realize I had a direct line. So I'm going to make sure I use that again. And then suddenly, everything changed because, we'd used Sergio Perez earlier in the race to make sure to try and back Lewis up, to give Max a chance. And what that did was prevent Lewis from having a free pit stop. So it put Mercedes in a dilemma. Do they pit? Do they stay out? Blah, blah, blah. We had nothing to lose, so we pitted. And then Max, with a new set of tires on that last lap, it was all down to him. I started life as a driver, as an aspiring young driver. I raced in go-karts and then graduated to Formula racing through Formula Renault, Formula 3, and what is now Formula 2. And whilst I was okay behind the wheel, I had my limitations. And so having got to the category just below Formula 1, it was all about raising sponsorship to fund a seat, and I managed to raise enough funding, but not to go to a top team. So I thought, well, rather than go to a poor team, I may as well set up a team myself, and and drive for the team, and then at least I've got a car and a set of overalls at the end of the year. And so that's what I did, and that was way back in 1997, 1998. But I was racing against some great drivers like Juan Pablo Montoya and Nick Heidfeld and other drivers that went on to Formula 1 at the time as well, and drivers that won Le Mans like Tom Christensen and so on. And it was clear that my abilities were a little lacking in comparison to theirs. But having got that far, what I'd enjoyed was working, in a team unit. And so when the decision came at the age of, I think I was 25 at the time, it was quite clear for me to say, okay, I've given it a good go as a driver. I've got to step out of the cockpit now. I'd made an agreement with my parents to take a year out between school and university, and I didn't want to go to university. So I was determined to make something of that team and apply the lessons of having driven for different types of team during my career, to apply those to running a team, how I would have liked to drive for a team. And that went okay. I won a few championships, and then Red Bull came to me and said, we're setting up, or we're going to buy what was the Jaguar team, and we'd like you to come and run it. So at 31 years of age, it was a fairly straightforward decision. Yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, I came in as the youngest. I'm still actually the youngest, but something I'm still quite happy with. But when I came into the sport, there were the titans, of the sport. Bernie Ecclestone was running it with Max Mosley, and that was a complete double act between the two of them. And then you got sort of the grandees of, Ron Dennis and Jean Todt running Ferrari, and Flavio Briatore running what was the Renault team, and Eddie Jordan there. And I remember the very first meeting I went to, and it was at Heathrow Airport. They used to have it in the Concorde Suite at the Hilton Hotel there. And nobody agreed on absolutely anything. There was complete chaos about the calendar. Even almost the day of the week it was under debate. And at the end of the meeting, everybody congratulated themselves on what a good meeting it was, and how much progress had been made. And I thought, well, actually, absolutely nothing has been achieved. And what was clear from the very beginning was that, those guys, whether it was a Ron Dennis or a Flavio Briatore or a Frank Williams, they were just fiercely competitive for their own teams, but also had the interests of the sport at heart, as well as entrepreneurial businessmen that needed Formula 1 to succeed, as well as their own interests. And that's probably the biggest difference between then and now, whereas there's a lot more self-interest than perhaps thinking sometimes about the bigger picture. Well, in some respects, it's easier to be the hunter because you've got nothing to lose and you're throwing everything at it than being the actual hunted. I think that, when we went through the winning period of 2010 onwards with Sebastian Vettel, it almost became the fear of failure that drove you forward. And people get used to winning. If we didn't go to a race and come back with a major trophy, there was surprise at that. And so then suddenly there was a big regulation change into 2014, where the engines changed significantly from a V8 to a V6 turbo, and suddenly we weren't winning anymore. And that was a massive mindset reset, because suddenly we were going to races and we didn't have a chance. And then to keep everybody focused on, remember what that felt like when we were winning. That's what we want to get back to, and getting everybody to remain focused on, that's what we're striving for, that's what we're here for. And there were elements that were beyond our control, like, for example, the engine that we had wouldn't allow us to compete on a competitive basis, but we had to grab the opportunities that were presented to us, whether it was a wet or dry race, or a Monaco race, or a specific type of Grand Prix. And then it was a matter of getting the ingredients in place for, specifically to get the right engine, so that when we got the ingredients, we got the driver, we got the team, we got the engine partner, and then there was, right, okay, this is our chance, this is our opportunity to take on, Mercedes, which is obviously what we did, last year, and obviously it went all the way to the final race. But it was an interesting period of going from being serial winners to suddenly occasional winners, to getting ourselves back into that challenger position. Well, it felt pretty stressful. For most of the race, I was thinking, Mercedes had the upper hand. We'd qualified on pole, but Lewis was, he was pulling it away. He had the race under control. Strategically, they did a couple of things that they didn't cover us. And I was thinking for half the race, how on earth am I going to, we've gone through all this year, we've been so close, but to lose both championships, how am I going to pick, Max up? What am I going to say to the team? How am I going to lift their spirits, after a weekend like this? And I think I was actually connected to the Sky commentators, which is always an interesting experience. And they asked me, how it was looking, and I said, well, I think, we're going to need something from the racing gods, to turn this around. And then Nicholas Latifi turned up, so I didn't realize I had a direct line. So I'm going to make sure I use that again. And then suddenly, everything changed, because we'd used Sergio Perez earlier in the race to make sure to try and back Lewis up, to give Max a chance. And what that did was prevent Lewis from having a free pit stop. So it put Mercedes in a dilemma. Do they pit? Do they stay out? Blah, blah, blah. We had nothing to lose, so we pitted. And then Max, with a new set of tires on that last lap, it was all down to him. And what he didn't tell us, he told us sort of after the race that while they were going around behind the safety car, because the way the drivers sit in the car, their feet are sort of 6 inches higher than their backside. Sometimes the blood drains out of their legs if they're not keeping them busy. And you can get really bad cramp. And he'd got massively bad cramp in his left leg. And he said, I couldn't feel my braking foot. So he said, I didn't really mean to overtake Lewis there, but I just went for the gap, and I hoped I could feel the brakes. And of course, he made it work. And then to achieve that result against the odds, to achieve that world championship, was a phenomenal feeling, and for the whole team, for him, after such an epic season, because it had really gone from the first race to the last race like a heavyweight bout, was incredibly satisfying. Look, I mean, it's totally conflicted, because you've got the interest of the team, and the team are paid on where we finish in the Constructors' Championship. Not one member of the team gets 1 penny of bonus for the driver winning the Drivers' Championship. They all get paid on where we are in the Team Championship, because that's where the revenues that come into the sport are paid out from the promoter. So everybody's interested in the Constructors' Championship. That's where the value is. The vanity and the prestige obviously is with the drivers. So the drivers are contractors to the team. They're there to perform for the team. But of course, they're conflicted because they're interested in the Drivers' World Championship. And, teammate is a fallacy. The worst thing that they're definitely not mates, because the guy in the other car is the only person that you're judged against. He's the only person with the same equipment. So he will either make or break your career. So it's a fine line, but certainly with the two drivers that we have, with Sergio being that little bit older, that bit wiser, he sort of sees a bigger picture. And I think that certainly last year, he was an incredible servant for the team, where he helped his teammate on numerous occasions, and certainly in that last race when he did a stunning job of backing Lewis up. That without that, Max wouldn't have won the championship. But of course, this year is a complete reset, new regulations, new cars, and Sergio's much more at home in the car, and so he now believes in himself that he can be a world champion, and that adds then another dynamic where yes, our main competition is Ferrari, but obviously the drivers want to race each other, but it's like, guys, be careful, this isn't your car. This is the 800 people that design and build it for you. It's their car. You're just lucky enough to drive it. So please respect that and look after it.
There's a montage of clips on the Formula One YouTube channel, and it's teammates crashing. And if I remember correctly,
yes,
there have been some instances where that has happened. With Red Bull. Not many, but could you describe to me what goes through your head and what happens afterwards when they've crashed into each other and they've walked back to the paddock, and then they have to kind of see you almost like the school teacher?
Yes. It's the most frustrating thing in the world is seeing your own cars collide with each other, because that is a massive home goal. It happened with Max and Daniel at the next race we're going to in Azerbaijan a few years ago, and it got a little bit out of control, and they were both at fault, and you could see it was building and building, and so they got a major bollocking after the race. But then again, as I said, it's not their car, so they both came back to the factory. And I made them go around every single department and apologize for crashing the team's cars. And then we do a debrief where we talk about the race after each Grand Prix with the whole team, so we get everybody together, about what we learned and what we can do better, what we did well, et cetera, et cetera. So both the drivers are a little bit, bit sheepish. And now what really hurts a driver is when they have to pay for something. So I announced at the briefing that obviously not only were they dreadfully sorry, but they would be picking up the tab for the Christmas bill, for the Christmas party, and drinks were on the drivers. And that probably hurt them more than anything else. But it is a difficult one. And whilst you want your drivers to be competitive, you still want them when they're racing against each other, particularly at this stage of the championship, early on, is, guys, just give each other room. Let's work with each other to get ahead of Ferrari, because they're our main opponent. I think so. I think, look, and that goes down to the grassroots. We want to get more people involved, and that means an entry level at karting or the entry level of car racing, whether that be with single-seater racing or tin-top racing. It needs to be more accessible, and I think that, as well, Red Bull does a lot in terms of investing in youth. I think we've got 14 drivers on our junior program, at the moment, and I think if other teams start to adopt that theory as well, then that will just encourage, more boys and girls into the sport, at a grassroots level, and I think things like the budget cap will put more of an emphasis as well on the drivers, because they will become a bigger differentiator, and so more investment will go into finding that next generation. Well, of course, look, it is a documentary and it's heavily edited, so I'm nothing like the person. I couldn't believe how much I swore. And, even compared to Gunther Steiner, I mean, wow. But what I think it's done is it's been fantastic to open the sport to a whole new audience, to explain the sport, to show some of the personalities, some of what goes on behind the scenes. And of course, they're making it's still a documentary at the end of the day, and the way it's cut sometimes has jaded with some of the drivers, that they've taken a bit of radio from Austria but played it at the Silverstone and things like that. But in terms of bringing a new audience into the sport has been fantastic. I mean, my 16-year-old daughter had no interest 3 years ago in what I did. And now she thinks I'm reasonably cool. But it's had a massive effect on Formula One, opening it up to a whole new audience, particularly in the US as well, where Formula One has always struggled to gain traction, to get interest. And now, it's not just my wife that gets recognized at customs when we go there. I think there's so many different elements of it. There's a pure sporting element, which is modern day chariot racing. It's man and machine at the absolute limit. And when you see these cars in reality, they're so much more impressive than when you see them on the television. The speed, the drivers are like fighter pilots. I mean, if you see them drive these cars, you think, how on earth does a human being control a vehicle at that speed? And the noise, the pure velocity of the vehicle it makes you stand back the first time you see them. And then, of course, Formula One, because of the amount, I guess, of the money and the commercial interest that's involved, Netflix has sort of turned us into the Kardashians on wheels. So, there's some interesting characters and personalities. There's some great stories, and there's some great. It's not just about the big teams. It's not just about the top teams. It's about the smaller teams trying to survive and work their way up the ladder as well. So it's a cross section of from a sporting side, from a business side, from a people side. There's so many elements to it.